Hi, this is Ms. Hadi from Olympian High School. I'm going to be teaching my AP World History classes through this video, this 5-minute video about some of the Islamic cultural traditions that spread in the post-classical period and some of the cultural practices that they adopted from areas that they took over. So let's just jump right in. This is related to the traditions and encounters PowerPoint slides 31 through 33, which can be found on my website. You guys can find them there. So I'm going to go into just the major ideas, and then I'll go into some details using the book and pages from the book that Dr. Metlis Traditions and Encounters. So let's just start with the idea of what's causing cohesion, cultural cohesion, unity throughout the Dar al-Islam. Think of the Dar al-Islam as the entire area that the Muslims took over during the post-classical period, and I'm referring specifically to some of the major dynasties like the Umayyad and the Abbasid dynasty, so after the caliphates. These are far-flung regions that are distant from each other, and they're very different from each other as well. So there were some things that made them feel like they were united, and one of those things was Sharia, or Islamic law. The Qadi and the ulama, which are the educated people, enforced these Islamic laws throughout the land and created a sense of cohesion. Islamic values were also taught in the madrasas, or the schools. And the other thing that became a symbol of like a common cultural value was the Kaaba, which of course was the symbol that many Muslims think of when they think of the Hajj or the pilgrimage to Mecca. And this Hajj is something that you're obligated to do as a Muslim if you can afford it and if you're healthy at some point in your life. This pilgrimage was a common unifying experience throughout the Islamic lands. Missionaries also helped to spread Islamic values throughout the Dar al-Islam, especially Sufi missionaries. Sufi missionaries are not your traditional Muslim. So we talked about Shia and Sunni Muslims. These are Muslims that tend to be a little bit more orthodox, particularly Sunnis, whereas Sufi missionaries are more ascetic, and they are, believe in a more mystical, devotional, pious pathway to God. So they might be engaged in like really passionate singing and dancing as a way to experience a magical sort of mystical union with God, instead of looking towards the Quran or the Hadiths, the more strict interpretations of Islam that more traditional theologians might look to. And they were part of the reason why Islam really spread throughout the world in this time, because they were widely popular, especially since they sometimes adopted a more relaxed attitude towards people practicing potentially pre-Islamic devotional beliefs and maybe mixing some of their other religions with Islam. This is not something that traditional Orthodox Islamic theologians would be okay with, but it was something that made them very popular amongst everyday people who converted to Islam. A famous Sufi thinker from Persia was Al-Ghazali. He basically argued that it was impossible for the human brain to comprehend God. And he really rejected some of the views that were popular at the time. For example, some Muslim thinkers and philosophers were trying to combine the ideas of Greek philosophers like Plato with Islamic teachings, and trying to find this rational way of understanding God. And Al-Ghazali rejected that. He attacked that, and he said that's not possible. The human intellect is not capable of doing that, and instead preached, that these intellectual pursuits were vain, and that you should instead feel your way to God, have this more mystical experience of God. And that's largely part of the reason why many Muslims actually turn towards the philosophies of Aristotle, which eventually gives rise to things like Ibn Rashid or Averroes, who popularized the teachings of Aristotle, and then the Christians later would learn about Aristotle from the Muslims, and that would give rise to a Christian movement to combine Aristotle's teachings with Christianity, called scholasticism. Okay, now don't think of it as a unidirectional diffusion. Islam didn't just spread throughout the lands, they also adopted cultural traditions from the lands that they went to. So from Persia, they adopted ideas about kingship and ideas about how to govern from the Sassanids that they took over those lands. Literature was also something that the Persians really affected the Muslim culture with. For example, 1001 Nights or the Rubaiyat, which you'll read about in your book. These are stories that were written in Persian and that influenced Islamic culture. The 1001 Nights, of course, being set in the time of the Abbasids with Harun al-Rashid. Another place from which they borrowed a lot of ideas is India. Now, the Muslims really didn't like Indian philosophy in terms of their beliefs in deities, but they loved Indian math. In fact, what we think of as Arabic numerals today in English came to us from India. They were Hindi numerals, and the Arabs learned about them and then popularized them throughout Europe, where they came to be called Arabic numbers. They also liked some of the ideas about science that Indians had, some ideas about medicine. I already mentioned about Hindi numbers. From Greece, they really liked ideas of anatomy that they applied to their own philosophies of medicine, and they also studied, as I mentioned, the ideas of Plato. And then later, after the attacks by the Sufis, like Al-Ghazali, they turned towards Aristotle. And then I told you about Ibn Rashid or Averroes,